to be not just an archive, but an architect, to help shape the future by revealing the past. The scholar in him, the part that had wept over the shattered data slug, yearned for it, but he thought of Kaya back in the silent monastery, now holding a fragile spark. He thought of Valdis curating his terrible lies for the greater good. He thought of the pilgrims in the shrine, their faces uplifted in simple, hopeful faith. A faith that, however false, was the only comfort in their short, brutal lives. He thought of Eleanor's final words, "You have armed the past. Now you must survive the future." To give Thorn what he wanted was to arm the past with nuclear fire. The resulting war would not be between truth and lies, but between competing truths, and billions would burn in the crossfire. He set the glass down carefully. "You speak of healing scars, Inquisitor, but what you propose is not surgery. It is a full-body transplant. The patient will reject it and die. The truth of Sethris is not a tool for building a new faith. It is a relic of a specific moment with specific people. It cannot be scaled, it cannot be dogma. Its power lies in its specificity, in its humanity. Institutionalize it, and you will create just another cage, more elegant perhaps, but a cage nonetheless." Thorn's face grew still. The scholar's warmth faded, leaving the Inquisitor's steel. "You refuse. I refuse to be the cornerstone of your new terrible truth," Remigus said. "The truth I carry is not yours to weaponize. It belongs to the dead of Sethris, to Eleanor Vant. It is their story, not a scripture." For a long moment, Thorn said nothing. He steepled his fingers, his grey eyes assessing Remigus as he would a complex text. "A principled stance," he said finally. "And a tragic one, for you are correct about one thing, the truth is a weapon, and since you will not wield it for the Imperium's future..." He tapped a control on the table. A hidden compartment slid open, revealing a complex neural interface crown, gleaming with needles and psychoreactive crystals. "I will have to extract it as a specimen for study. You mistake me, Remigus. I offered partnership first out of respect for your intellect, but the mission does not require your willing participation, only your memory." The door hissed open. Two figures in Iterator robes entered, their movements synced and silent. "The mind, however, is a fragile thing under such extraction," Thorn said, rising as the tech priests moved towards Remigus. "What remains may not be functional, a loss to scholarship, but a necessary one. The future thanks you for your sacrifice." Remigus did not struggle as the cold hands guided him into the interface chair. He looked past the approaching crown, past Thorn, to the shelves of books. He thought of the archive he had built in his mind, the last legacy of Sethris. They could take the data, they could copy the memories, but they could not take the meaning he had ascribed to it. That was his alone. As the needles kissed his temples and the world dissolved into a screaming torrent of silver light and bunker dust, he focused on one thing, the face of Kalen from the recording, nodding his vote. A simple, human yes in the face of oblivion. He would give them the data, but he would bury the meaning so deep in the noise of his own pain that they would never find it. The extraction was not a single event, but a dismantling. It was the careful, excruciating disassembly of a cathedral of memory, stone by sacred stone. The psychoreactive needles did not simply read his thoughts, they insisted upon them, dragging every associated detail, every emotional hue, every synaptic ghost into the harsh, sterile light of the Veritas Lux's cogitators. Remigus lived Sethris 1,000 times. He felt the grit in Eleanor's boots as she paced the bunker. He tasted the stale protein paste of a militia's last meal. He heard the colonel's voice, not as a historical recording, but as a vibration in his own throat, thick with contempt and fear. He felt the terrifying, vertiginous moment when Eleanor decided to become a mirror, not a sword the cold calculus of love transformed into a weapon. And he felt the echo, not as he had in the shrine, but from the inside, the endless, looping agony of being trapped as a symbol, the weight of 6,000 years of desperate prayer pressing down, distorting the simple, terrible beauty of the original act into a gilded, screaming icon. The Iterator tech priests were thorough. They took it all. They mapped the neural pathways that held the smell of Sethris's reign. They quantified the emotional resonance of Kalen's loyalty. They even extracted the later forged memory of the demonic pact that Valdis had implanted, tagging it as a secondary contaminant narrative. Through it all, a part of Remigus, the core that was the archivist, the observer, remained. He could not stop the theft, but he could annotate it. As they pulled each memory, he layered it with context they could not perceive. The profound sorrow that the act had been necessary, the quiet pride that it had been human, the bittersweet knowledge that it was unrepeatable as dogma. He embedded the meaning in the subjective, emotional texture of the memory itself, a watermark on the data. They would get the facts. They would never truly understand the truth. Days bled into weeks, measured only by the cycles of agony and exhausted, drugged respite. Thorn was often present, watching the data streams cascade across hololithic displays, his grey eyes alight with a fervent, hungry satisfaction. "You see?" he would murmur, more to himself than to Remigus, who hung limp in the interface throne. The solidarity, it's not a vague spiritual concept, it's a measurable, psychological force she harnessed. A convergent emotional resonance. This is not faith. This is psychosociological engineering of the most sublime order. He was turning a moment of supreme humanity into a cold science. Remigus, through the haze, understood this was the true desecration. Finally, the process reached its end. They had drained the primary memory banks. The tech priests retracted the needles with a soft, pneumatic hiss. Remigus slumped forward, held only by the restraints. His mind felt like a ransacked library, books torn from shelves, pages scattered, the careful order obliterated. He was hollowed out, a vessel cracked and drained. Thorn approached, studying a final data slate. Fascinating. The emotional fungia at the moment of the entity's dissolution, it correlates precisely with a drop in the amygdala readings of the surrounding militia and a spike in prefrontal cortex activity associated with altruistic determination. She didn't channel an external power, she orchestrated an internal one. He looked down at Remigus with something akin to pity. "You were correct. It is a relic of a specific moment, but within that specificity lies a universal principle, a template. We can study it, refine it, teach it. Imagine, Remigus, if every Imperial commander, every commissar understood the mechanics of this kind of sacrifice, not as blind faith, but as applied emotional physics." Remigus tried to speak. His tongue was a dry stone. He managed a rasp. "You make it sound like a artillery manual." "It is better than an artillery manual," Thorn said. "It is a weapon for the soul, and thanks to you, we have its schematics." He gestured to the tech priests. "See to him, stabilize his vital signs. The mind is fragile, but the body may yet serve." They injected him with stims and nutrient fluids. The world swam back into a shaky, painful focus. He was unstrapped and hauled to his feet. His legs would not support him. Two servitors bore his weight as they marched him from the contemplatorium, not back to a cell, but to the ship's launch bay. Thorn walked beside him. "Your part is done, Curator Fabricant. You have served the future, albeit unwillingly. There is no place for you in it. You are a walking paradox now, a man who contains the origin point of a truth too dangerous to be widely known, yet whose mind is too damaged to be a reliable vessel. You are a liability to my faction, and to the Monstrosa should they ever recapture you." They arrived at the launch bay. A small, battered system shuttle, an old Argus model, sat on the deck, its ramp lowered. It was prepped for flight. "You are giving me a ship?" Remigus slurred, confusion cutting through the fog. "I am giving you an exit," Thorn corrected. "And a mission, of sorts." He handed Remigus a small, simple data chit. "These are coordinates for a nameless moon in a system marked for exterminatus in 7 standard days. A heretic stronghold. The order has been signed. The cyclonic torpedoes are already loaded on a battleship in the fleet. Nothing can stop it." Remigus stared at the chit. "Why?" "Because on that moon," Thorn said, his voice low and deliberate, "a small, radical sect preserves what they call the Chronicle of True Saints. They are mystics, fanatics. They have somehow pieced together fragments, real fragments of stories like Sethri's. They venerate Eleanor not as an imperial saint, but as a psyker of communion. They are close to a breakthrough that could independently verify parts of the truth you carry. They are a loose end. The Monstrosa would torture them, create another messy cover-up. The Ordo Hereticus would simply burn them. I prefer a cleaner solution." He looked into Remigus's eyes. "You will go there. you will find their archive. And you will bear witness. You will see what happens when half-truths ferment into heresy. You will see the chaos that arises from uncurated revelation. And then, in 7 days, the fire will come from heaven and cleanse it all. You may choose to die with them, enlightened, or you may choose to board this shuttle and leave before the final hour. It is your final choice. It was a cruel, perfect test. Thorn was using him one last time as a measuring instrument for the consequences of free truth. He would be an observer to the death of a truth-seeker cult, a living lesson in why control was necessary. The servitors shoved him up the ramp into the shuttle, the hatch sealed, the craft was automated, pre-programmed with the coordinates. As the launch bay doors opened to the void, Remigus collapsed into the pilot's chair, the data chit clutched in his trembling hand. He looked at the simple controls, at the star map already plotting the course to a nameless moon and its doomed truth-tellers. He was a ghost of a ghost, a shell filled with stolen memories and a final terrible assignment. The shuttle shot out into the silent black, a tiny speck of life hurled towards a scheduled doom. Behind him, the Veritas Lux turned, its engines flaring as it headed for the warp, carrying the blueprint of a saint's humanity to be weaponized by a new kind of faith. Ahead, only fire awaited. Remigus closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to visit the ruins of his mind. The memories were jumbled, raw, but they were there. He reached for the feeling, not the facts. The feeling of Sona's hand brushing his as she passed a bandage. The feeling of the militia's resolve hardening into a single sharp point. The feeling of Eleanor's release. They had taken the data, but they had not taken the why. The why was broken and scattered, but it was still in the debris. And as the shuttle hurtled towards its destination, he began, slowly, painfully, to pick up the pieces. The moon was a leprous thing, its surface pocked by deep canyons that glowed with a faint, sickly phosphorescence from bioluminescent fungi. The shuttle, its system's basic and nearing decay, shuddered as it breached the thin atmosphere and descended towards the coordinates. Remigus watched the landscape rise, to meet him a jagged wilderness of basalt and creeping, pulsating moss. There were no cities, no ports, no signs of civilization beyond a single irregular structure nestled in the deepest crevasse. A monastery of sorts, built from the moon's own black stone, fused and shaped by tools or perhaps by will. It looked less like a fortress of heresy and more like a wound that had scabbed over. The shuttle sat down on a rough landing scrape a kilometer from the structure. The air that greeted him when the ramp lowered was thick, humid, and carried a sweet rotten scent like decaying fruit and incense. The gravity was light, pulling at his already unsteady limbs. He had no weapon, no supplies beyond the stim still in his system. He had only the data chit and the ruins in his head. He walked. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sigh of a strange wind through the canyon and the occasional drip of viscous liquid from fungal stalactites. He expected challenge, a bullet, a cry of alarm. None came. As he neared the black monastery, its doors great slabs of stone stood open, an invitation or indifference. Inside, the air was cooler. The walls were not carved, but grown the stone showed flowing organic patterns, veins of that same faint phosphorescence providing a gloomy illumination. He moved through antechambers filled not with weapons or idols, but with banks of crystal data stacks, humming softly, and shelves containing thousands of hand-scribed scrolls. The place was an archive. A silent, waiting archive. He found them in the central chamber. They were not warriors. They were perhaps 24 men and women, dressed in simple, undyed robes. They sat in a circle on the bare stone floor, not in prayer, but in a deep, shared meditation. Their eyes were closed. In the center of their circle lay objects on a cloth, a rusted Lascan power pack, a fragment of ceramite from what might have been pre-unification wars, a lock of hair sealed in clear resin, a simple iron nail. They were psychically resonant. He could feel it, a low, harmonious hum in the air, thinner and purer than the chaotic echo of the shrine, but of a similar nature. They were not channeling power. They were listening. One of them, an older woman with a face like cracked leather and eyes milky with cataracts, opened her eyes. She did not look at him, but through him. "You are the one who carries the oldest song," she said, her voice a dry rustle. We heard its echo when the machine men combed your mind. It drew us from the quiet. It is why you were sent here." Remigus stopped, wary. "Thorn sent me to witness your end. We know of the coming fire." Another, a younger man with intense dark eyes, said without opening his. "The future screams of it. It is a loud death, but the past you carry, it sings of a quiet one." We would hear that song before the loud one comes. They were not afraid. They had the serenity of those who have already accepted their mortality and whose curiosity outweighs their survival instinct. They were scholars of a different breed, not of data, but of psychic impression, archaeologists of emotion. "You venerate Eleanor," Remigus stated. "We venerate the moment," the old woman corrected. "The moment when the many became one against the devourer. It is a pattern. It has happened elsewhere, in whispers. On Sethris, it happened in a shout. We have gathered whispers. You carry the shout. Will you share it?" They did not want facts. They wanted the experience. They wanted to feel Sethris through him, to let their psychic sensitivity resonate with the memory he held. It was the ultimate act of historical preservation, not writing it down, but allowing it to be felt one final time by a receptive audience before the end. A part of him rebelled. He had seen what happened when the past was not curated, when it was allowed to run free. It had shattered a cathedral. But these people were not building a religion to replace the imperial cult. They were not seeking power. They were connoisseurs of lost human moments, gathering the last echoes before they faded forever. They were, in their own way, archivists too. And he was so terribly tired of being alone with the weight. He sat, cross-legged, on the stone floor outside their circle. He did not try to join their meditation. He simply closed his eyes, and for the first time since the extraction, he did not fight the memories. He did not organize them or annotate them. He let them flow, not as a data stream, but as a sensory tapestry. He focused on the feeling of the bunker's cool, recycled air, the gritty taste of fear on his tongue, Eleanor's tongue, the rough texture of the tactical map under her fingers, the tightness in Kaelin's jaw as he voted yes, the overwhelming, crushing love for her people that was not sentimental, but fierce and desperate and sharp as a knife. He did not broadcast it. He simply remembered, fully and completely, in the presence of those who could listen. The psychic hum in the chamber changed. It deepened, harmonized. He felt gentle, feather-light tendrils of perception brush against the edges of his consciousness, not invasive, but receptive, like listeners leaning in. He heard soft, collective gasps, a sigh of profound sorrow, a murmur of awe. They were not watching a play. They were feeling the decisions as they were made. They felt the sacrifice not as a theological concept, but as a gut-wrenching, practical choice. They felt the entity not as a daemon, but as a pattern of hunger, and they felt the precise, terrifying moment when the pattern encountered a reflection of its opposite and shattered. For a timeless period, the Black Monastery was no longer on a doomed moon. It was in a bunker on Sethris, in the hearts of doomed men and women. Finally, the memory reached its end, the silver light, the release, the long, cold silence of being forgotten. Remigus opened his eyes, drained. The cultists were weeping, silent tears cutting tracks through the dust on their faces. But they were also smiling, beatific, fulfilled smiles. "It was not a miracle," the old woman whispered, her blind eyes shining with reflected phosphorescence. "It was a choice, a million choices, all aligning. So beautiful, so human." The young man opened his eyes, looking at Remigus with newfound understanding. They turned her into a cage because they were afraid of the key. They could not understand that the key was not hers alone. It was held by all of them, together. Remigus nodded, his throat tight. They had understood. In minutes, they had grasped the core truth it had taken him a lifetime to articulate. "The fire comes soon," the young man said, looking upwards as if he could see through rock to the fleet in the void. "You should go. Your shuttle is waiting." "You will not come?" Remigus asked, though he knew the answer. "We have heard the song," the old woman said. "Our collection is complete. To run would be to cling to the vessel when the wine has already been drunk. We will stay. The fire is loud, but it is just another end. We have felt a better one." It was a peace he could not fathom. They had achieved what Thorn sought with all his schematics and psychosociology, a true, reconciled understanding of the past. And it had led them not to a desire to reform the future, but to a quiet acceptance of their place in its end. He stood, his body aching. He had done what Thorn sent him to do. He had witnessed. He had seen the chaos of uncurated truth, and it was not chaos, it was grace. "Thank you," he said, the words inadequate. "Go, bearer of the song," the old woman said. "Carry the quiet with you. The galaxy has enough noise." He walked back through the silent archive, past the crystals and scrolls holding a million whispers. He boarded the shuttle. As he powered up the systems, a final, gentle psychic touch brushed his mind. A chorus of voices, serene and united. "Remember us to the quiet." The shuttle lifted off. As it cleared the canyon rim, he saw on the sensor display the first flashes in high-orbit Lance batteries firing, the distinctive energy signature of cyclonic torpedoes entering their descent phase. He turned the shuttle away, pushing its engines towards the system's edge and the nearest calculated Mandeville point. He did not look back. He didn't need to. A minute later, the sensors flared white as the moon below ceased to be, replaced by a new, brief star of purgation. The fire had come, the heresy, the archive, the listeners all gone. The shuttle plunged into the lonely dark between stars. Remigus sat in the pilot's seat, adrift. Thorn thought he had sent him to learn a lesson about the danger of free truth. The iterators thought they owned the data of Sethres. The Monstrosa thought the past was safely buried under new lies. But in a silent monastery on a dead moon, the truth had been heard, understood, and released. It had ended not with a war, but with a sigh. He had survived the future Thorn and Valdis had built, but he was not the same man. He was no longer just an archive, or a witness, or a weapon. He was a relic of a relic, a quiet man in a quiet ship, carrying a song that had finally been heard by those who knew how to listen. He set a course for nowhere in particular. The galaxy was vast, and it held many silences. Perhaps, in one of them, there was a place for a man who carried a quiet truth. Or perhaps he would simply drift until his own end came, as quietly as the one he had just witnessed. For now, he remembered, and in the remembering, he was free. The warp was a fever dream. The shuttle's Geller field, a weak and aging thing meant for in-system hops, flickered like a dying candle. Remigus felt the pressure of the Imperium first as a headache, then as a whispering in the ship's metal bones, and finally as a kaleidoscope of half-formed visions bleeding at the edge of his sight. He saw silver light not as memory, but as a swirling river outside the viewport. He heard the chittering roar of Sethris' entity, now layered with the serene voices of the moon cult and the cold, logical tones of Inquisitor Thorn. His stolen, fractured past was becoming a lens that distorted the present. The shuttle shuddered violently, its machine spirit screaming in binary distress. It was being pulled off its desperate, uncalculated course. A tear in reality, a minor warp rift, or simply the attentions of something that had smelled the psychic resonance, still clinging to him like psychic grave dust. The control panels erupted in warning runes. He was going to be swallowed, lost forever in the echo of his own trauma. Then, with a jarring thud that reverberated through the tiny craft, the shaking stopped. The warp's gibbering faded to a dull hum. The shuttle was locked in a tractor beam of immense, physical certainty. Through the static-streaked viewport, a shape resolved not a sleek iterator vessel or a menacing warship, but a blocky, ancient, and incredibly massive bulk hauler. Its hull was a patchwork of repairs and devotional seals, its prow adorned with a faded, chipped fresco of a saint he did not recognize. It was a Medusa-class freighter, a workhorse of the Imperium's forgotten backwaters. A garbled Vox transmission cut through the noise. "I, shuttle, identify. You are adrift in a navigational hazard. Prepare for grapple and board." The voice was female, worn with authority and a faint, unplaceable accent. It held no malice, only the pragmatic tone of a captain salvaging wreckage. Remigus had no energy for deception. He keyed the comm. "Shuttle. Designation lost. Single occupant. Systems failing. I submit to your aid." The docking was rough but efficient. His shuttle was drawn into a cavernous, dingy hold smelling of machine oil, stale oxygen, and faintly of livestock. As the atmosphere equalized with a hiss, the rear ramp lowered. He stumbled out into the dim light, his legs barely holding him. They were waiting for him, a dozen figures clad in mismatched flak armor and heavy work clothes, weapons held not at ready, but with cautious awareness. They were not Imperial Guard, not Void Privateers. They looked like the crew of a frontier world militia. At their head stood the woman from the Vox. She was tall, her dark hair shot with grey and pulled into a severe knot. Her face was lined from wind and worry, not decadence. She held a well-worn las pistol low at her side. Her eyes, a piercing green, scanned him with the speed of one used to assessing threats and value. "You look like hell dredged from a sump," she stated, her voice flat. "What's your business in the Screaming Gulf?" "I have no business," Remigus answered honestly, his voice a dry croak. "I was escaping." "Escaping what?" "The past. Several versions of it." A faint, grim smile touched her lips. "Aren't we all? I am Captain Anya Rostova of the Free Trader Penitent Witness. You are on my ship."
"Your craft is scrap. That makes you my responsibility. Or my cargo. Which will it be?" He had nothing to bargain with. No wealth, no status, no lies he had the strength to maintain. He had only what was in his head. "I am an archivist. My mind contains specialized data. Historical data. It is of no market value, but it is dangerous to possess." Rostova's eyes narrowed. "Dangerous how?" "It contradicts sanctioned history. Men kill for it, men die for it." She studied him for a long moment, then holstered her pistol. "We're not afraid of contradictions out here. The Imperial Truth is a thin soup on the frontier. We deal in practical truths. Can you work? Can you read, cipher, manage inventory?" The mundane question was a lifeline. "Yes." "Good. You work your passage. You cause trouble. You preach heresy. Or you draw the wrong kind of attention. I space you. Clear. Clear." And so, Remigus, former curator fabricant of the Pacificus archives, witness to the first sanctioned truth and its many perversions, became a ledger clerk on the Penitent Witness. The ship was a microcosm of the Imperium's ragged edge. Its crew were refugees from a dousing failed worlds, deserters from lost wars, and simple folk born to the void. They had no grand illusions. Their faith was a personal, quiet thing, focused on the Emperor as protector of voyagers, mixed with older, pragmatic superstitions about void spirits and engine ghosts. They argued, they laughed, they played crude dice games, and they worked with the weary solidarity of people who know their survival depends on each other. Rostova in a tight ship, but a fair one. She was protecting something more than profit. Remigus learned, through snippets of conversation, that the Witness regularly made dangerous runs to isolated, non-compliant settlements, delivering medical supplies, machine parts, and data slates containing technical manuals and agricultural templates. They took payment in raw or hand-woven textiles, or sometimes just promises. They were smugglers of survival. One night, after he had successfully reconciled a 3-month discrepancy in their Prometheum consumption logs, Rostova summoned him to her small, functional cabin. She offered him a drink of harsh, locally distilled liquor. "You're good with numbers," she said, not looking at him, studying a star chart. "Too good for a random drifter. Your specialized data, does it have to do with the warp, with the things that scream out there?" He took a careful sip, the liquor burning its way down. "Indirectly, it is about a story that was changed many times to try and keep people safe from such things." She finally looked at him. "And what was the original story?" He had not spoken of it since the Black Moon. The words felt strange on his tongue. It was about people who were afraid, but who chose to be brave for each other, not because a god told them to, but because it was the only logical way to save what they loved. Rostova was silent for a moment, then she barked a short, humorless laugh. "That is a dangerous story. It suggests we don't need the priests and the lords to tell us how to be human." She leaned forward. "But out here, we already know that. When a hull breach happens, you don't pray to the Lactatio Divinitatis. You grab a sealant pack and your mate's hand. The Imperium's golden stories are for the people in the safe, warm course of worlds. Out in the dark, we have older stories." She saw his surprise. "You think you're the first to carry a hidden truth, archivist?" Every ship that runs the margins carries one. Every settlement that remembers a folkway band by the missionary Galatia holds one. The Imperium is a blanket thrown over a galaxy of little truths. It smothers most, but not all. He realized then what the penitent witness truly was. It was not just a freighter, it was an archive too, a living, breathing archive of practical, human resilience. It carried not data slugs of forbidden history, but seeds, medicine, and knowledge that allowed fragile pockets of humanity to persist outside the narrative. Rostova wasn't just a captain, she was a curator. Like him, her collection was the future itself. "Why do you do it?" he asked. "The risk is enormous." Her green eyes hardened. "Because someone has to bear witness to the people the Imperium forgets, to the ways of living it tramples. The Administratum calls us smugglers and thieves. Maybe we are, but we are also a record, a living record, the penitent witness. We witness the penitence the Imperium forces on its people, and we try to ease it where we can." The ship's name took on a profound new meaning. Month turned into a year. Remigus found a rhythm. The ghosts in his mind did not leave, but they grew quieter amidst the real, immediate concerns of air, scrubber efficiency, and food ration calculations. He began to teach some of the younger crew members basic literacy and numeracy.
He told them stories not of Sethries, but of other things, parables of ingenuity and cooperation he'd found in truly ancient pre-imperial records. The crew listened, not as heretics, but as people hungry for a tale where problems were solved by wit and teamwork, not by divine intervention. He was healing. Not by forgetting, but by contextualizing. His terrible, unique truth was just one of billions, a single dark thread in the vast, ragged tapestry of human survival. It did not need to be a weapon or a revelation. It could just be a story, one he told only to himself. Then, the storm found them. It was a patrol of the Imperial Navy, a frigate called the Righteous Blade, enforcing a sudden full quarantine of a sector plagued by ideological contagion. The Iterator's war for truth was spilling over, manifesting as purges and lockdowns. The witness was caught trying to run medical supplies to a quarantined colony. The Righteous Blade hailed them, orders crisp and final. Heave to and prepare for boarding and inspection. Any resistance will be met with annihilation. On the bridge, the crew looked to Rostova, faces etched with fear. They were outgunned 100 times over. Rostova's hand hovered over the Vox. She could lie, try to bribe, run. The run would end in plasma fire. Remigus stepped forward. He felt preternaturally calm. "Captain, let me speak to them." She stared at him. "Why?" "Because my specialized data includes the command protocols and recognition codes for the Pacificus Archive security fleet, last updated 20 years ago. The Navy uses a derivative algorithm. I may be able to confuse the issue, to make us look like something we're not. What would we be? An Iterator auxiliary vessel on a sealed mission. A black ship. They fear the Inquisition more than they love their quarantine. It was a desperate gamble. He would be using the tools of Thorn and the Monstrosa, the architecture of lies, to protect this tiny ship of quiet truth. Rostova searched his face, then nodded once. "Do it." He opened a channel, his voice adopting the cold, clipped tone he had heard from Thorn's tech priests. "Righteous Blade, this is Auxiliary Remigus, 7 of the Ordo Iterator vessel Penitent Witness. Our mission is Alpha-level sequestration. Your quarantine is noted. Stand aside. Our authority supersedes local naval mandate. Authentication code Omicron Phi Sethries Primary." He recited a string of numbers and high Gothic phrases that were not a code, but a compressed, verbal hash of the emotional Funja data Thorn's men had prized the moment of Eleanor's sacrifice. It was pure psychic noise given linguistic form, meaningless but patterned with the resonance of a profound human event. On the witnesses' bridge, they held their breath. A long silence from the frigate, then a new, more hesitant voice. "Auxiliary Remigus 7, your authentication pattern is atypical. Please repeat mission designation." Remigus didn't blink. "Mission designation, soul, mirror. Objective, contained." Your obstruction is noted. Shall I update the iterator's ledger with the name Righteous Blade? Another pause. The threat was implicit. To be on the bad side of an inquisitorial ordos was a death sentence for a career, if not a life. Acknowledged, auxiliary, the voice came back, strained. You may proceed. Righteous Blade out. The frigate's targeting locks disengaged. It turned away, moving to intercept a less troublesome-looking transport. The bridge of the witness erupted in relieved exhalations and shaky laughter. Rostova looked at Remigus, her expression unreadable. Cethres? Primary? She asked quietly. The original story, he said simply. She placed a hand on his shoulder, a brief, solid grip. Then it seems even the Emperor's sharpest tools can be blunted by an old, human truth. She turned back to the helm. Plot a course for the colony. Full burn. Let's deliver these antibiotics. As the ship surged forward, Remigus looked out at the stars. He was not free of the past. He never would be. But he was no longer its prisoner, or its prophet, or its pawn. He was its scribe, sailing on a ship of witnesses, using the echoes of one truth to protect a living, breathing future. It was not the ending he had imagined. It was better. It was a life. The colony on Grenshaw's Hope was a scar on a glacial world, a cluster of geothermal boreholes and pressurized domes huddling under a sky of perpetual twilight. The penitent witness delivered its cargo of antibiotics, viral suppressants, and replacement parts for the failing atmosphere processes. The colonists, their faces gaunt with more than just the chill, accepted the supplies with a quiet, desperate gratitude that spoke of a people long accustomed to being abandoned. They paid with raw, uncut crystals that glowed with a faint internal warmth, a currency of little value to the wider Imperium, but vital to the witness's barter economy on other frontier worlds.
Rostova herself supervised the unloading, her presence a steadying force. Remigus worked alongside the crew, his archivist's hands now calloused from hauling crates and operating cargo lifts. The rhythmic, physical labor was a balm. It anchored him in a present of cold air, groaning machinery, and the shared, simple goal of getting the job done. It was in the colony's central dome, amidst the hum of life support and the smell of recycled air and yeast vats, that he saw it, carved into a support column, almost obscured by pipes and data conduits, was a simple symbol. It was not the Imperial Aquila. It was a circle, divided by a vertical line, with three smaller dots arranged around its upper arc. A folk symbol, ancient and local, a glyph for hearth, community, or the shared fire. It was the exact symbol, stylized but unmistakable, that had been etched onto the buckle of the militia issue belt Eleanor Vant had worn in the original bunker recording. A cold that had nothing to do with Grenshaw's climate shot through him. It was a coincidence of impossible magnitude. Cethres was 60 centuries gone and light years away. The idea that its iconography could appear here, on this forgotten rock, was absurd. And yet, he found the colony's elder, a woman named Lestra whose eyes held the same weary wisdom as Rostova's. He pointed to the carving, keeping his voice casual. An interesting symbol, local. Lestra traced the carving with a gnarled finger. Old, she said, from the first landings. The stories say it was the mark of the ones who led us here, the ones who remembered how to build warmth in the cold. She gave a faint smile. Superstition, probably, but we keep it. Reminds us that we made this place ourselves. The ones who remembered. The phrase echoed in Remigus's mind. He thought of the bunker on Cethres, of the shared resolve, not a divine mandate, but a remembered duty to one another. Do you have other stories, about the first landings? He asked, the archivist in him stirring, awake and wary. Lestra shrugged. Fragments, children's tales, really, about a great journey from a broken world, about leaders who were not kings or priests, but keepers of the bond. They fought not with great armies, but by making their hearts a wall. She chuckled. Poetic nonsense. The real history is in the soil logs and the borecore samples. Poetic nonsense that resonated with a terrifying familiarity, making their hearts a wall. It was a crude, folk poetry version of the psychic reflective principle Eleanor had unknowingly used. He thanked her and returned to the ship, his mind racing. It was not proof. It was an echo of an echo. A folk memory so distorted by time and isolation it was barely recognizable. But the symbol was specific. That night, in the cramped quarters he shared with 2 engine men, he accessed the witness's modest data library. It was a haphazard collection of technical manuals, stellar charts, and fragmented colonial records. He searched for references to the symbol, for mentions of broken worlds, or keepers of the bond. He found whispers. A mining colony in the Helican sector had a similar glyph on its founding charter. A nomadic trader clan in the Ultima Segmentum used a variant as a kinship sigil, always on the fringe, always amongst populations descended from early, chaotic waves of human expansion. Long before the Imperial Truth or the cult had solidified, a pattern, faint as a star seen through atmospheric haze, began to suggest itself. What if the event on Cethres was not unique? What if it was an extreme, concentrated example of a latent human capability, a capacity for profound, unifying empathy that could, under unimaginable pressure, manifest a palpable, psychic effect? And what if fragments of that event, carried by survivors or whispered in the stories of those they saved, had seeded these folktales and symbols across the diaspora of mankind? He was not carrying the truth. He was carrying a particularly well-documented example of a deeper, older, and widely scattered truth. A truth not about one saint, but about the species itself. The revelation was dizzying. It made Thorne's attempts to weaponize it seem even more myopic, and the Monstrosa's efforts to bury it even more futile. You could not cage an instinct written into the genome of a scattered galaxy. You could only try to redirect it, or deny it. The witness departed Grenshaw's hope, its holds now filled with glowing crystals. As they broke orbit, Remigus requested a meeting with Rostova. In her cabin, he laid out his theory, showing her the data fragments and the symbol. She listened, her face impassive. When he finished, she sipped her liquor. So you're saying this miracle of yours wasn't a miracle? It was, what? An old human trick we've forgotten how to do. Not a trick, he said. A potential. A terrible, beautiful potential that only surfaces at the breaking point.
And it seems, memories of it survive, like genetic memories, in stories and symbols on the edge of things. And what does that mean for my ship, Archivist? She asked, her green eyes sharp. It means the story I carry is bigger than I thought. It means the Imperium isn't just fighting a war against the dark. It's fighting a war against a part of its own human nature, the part that remembers we are stronger together than any one of us alone. Your ship, Captain. You call it bearing witness to penitence. I think it's also bearing witness to that old latent memory. Every time you deliver aid, every time this crew works as one, you're echoing that same principle. Not as a weapon, but as a practice. Rostova was silent for a long time, staring at the star chart on her wall. A nice thought, she said finally, but it doesn't change the reality. The righteous blade is still out there. The Imperium's weight still presses down. One ship's practice doesn't shift a galaxy. No, Remigus agreed. But a galaxy is made of countless small things, and sometimes an idea has its own gravity. He didn't press further. He had shared his burden not as a secret to be kept, but as a context to be understood. He returned to his duties. The voyage continued. They dodged patrols, negotiated with rogue traders, delivered supplies to desperate worlds. Remigus began a new project, not in secret, but with Rostova's tacit approval. He started to compile a new log, not of forbidden history, but of present-tense anthropology. He recorded the folk symbols, the fragmented creation myths, the communal practices of the isolated colonies they serviced. He cross-referenced them, looking for patterns of resilience, cooperation, and shared identity that existed outside the imperial narrative. It was a study of humanity's immune system, the ways it kept itself alive in the margins. He called it, in his private files, the Chronicle of Unyielding Embers. One cycle, as they transited a nebula known for sensor ghosts and calm warp currents, the ship's astropath, a wizened, twitching man named Cho, collapsed in his sanctum. The choir reported a backlash of painful luminosity in the warp. Cho was brought to the medbay, babbling. Rostova and Remigus were summoned. The astropath's blind eyes were wide, seeping silvery fluid. He clutched at Remigus's robe as he passed. "The song!" Cho hissed, his voice raw. "The oldest song, it's screaming again. But different, not one voice, a chorus. A broken chorus. They're calling it forth." "Calling what forth?" Rostova demanded, gripping the old man's shoulder. "The pattern. The devourer that feeds on fear. It's learned. It's echoing back the call. It's coming to the place where the song is loudest." Cho fell back, unconscious. A deep, unsettling tremor passed through the ship, a vibration that came not from the engines, but from the space around them. The nebula's gentle gases outside the viewports began to swirl, not with natural currents, but with a sickening, familiar sentience. Tendrils of iridescent color, beautiful and vile, reached towards the witness, the entity from Sethres, or a cousin, or an echo that had learned. And Cho's words implied a terrifying possibility. The scattered, latent memories of humanity's unity, the very thing Remigus was documenting, were acting as a beacon. And something in the warp was answering, not with sympathy, but with a predatory mimicry. It was using the pattern of the old human defense as a lure. The ship's alarms blared. The crew scrambled to battle stations, but their weapons were for pirates and asteroids, not warp spawn. Rostova looked at the gathering storm outside, then at Remigus, her face grim. "It seems your old story has followed us, and it's brought a friend." The nebula darkened, coalescing into a single, vast eye of swirling color and impossible geometry fixed upon their tiny ship. A psychic pressure began to build, a weight of ancient, intelligent hunger. It remembered the taste of fear from Sethres, and now it had found a trail of breadcrumbs made of forgotten songs and carved symbols leading to a single, vulnerable ship. And it was here. The silence that followed the blaring alarms was more terrifying than the noise. It was the silence of a machine holding its breath, of a crew frozen in the face of an enemy their weapons could not touch. The nebula outside the viewports was gone, replaced by a wall of living, sentient color. It pulsed with a low, subaudible hum that vibrated in the fillings of their teeth and the marrow of their bones. It was the chittering roar of Sethres, refined, intelligent, and horrifically curious. "All power to the Geller field." Rostova's voice cracked across the bridge, shattering the paralysis. "Evasive pattern kappa, get us out of this cloud." The witness groaned as its engines flared, thrusting it sideways. The entity did not chase. It simply expanded, its boundaries flowing to encompass their new position with lazy, terrifying inevitability. They were inside it. The starfield vanished completely. The universe was now this shimmering, hungry membrane. "Geller field at 120%, the Ingensia shrieked, her mechadendrites flailing over the console. "It is not repelling it. The field is being tasted. It is learning the frequency." Psychic pressure spiked. Crew members on the bridge cried out, clutching their heads. Visions flashed not of demons, but of personal, intimate fears. A gunner saw his child back home, sick with a plague he couldn't cure. A helmsman felt the void of space, not as emptiness, but as the absolute solitude of his own death. The entity wasn't attacking. It was broadcasting their own latent terrors back at them, amplified. It was using the mirror principle Eleanor had discovered, but in reverse. It was reflecting their fear to feed itself. Rostova staggered, gripping her command throne. Her face was a mask of pain, her eyes seeing some private, devastating horror. The ship was coming apart from the inside out. Remigus stood rooted, the pressure of physical weight on his skull, but within him, the archive stirred. This was not the echo of Sethres, trapped and tragic. This was the real thing, or something kin to it, and it had evolved. It had seen the pattern of human unity and was perverting it, using human empathy as a trap. Cho's words echoed, "It's learned." He had to do something. He was not Eleanor. He had no militia, no shared resolve to channel. He had a broken mind full of stolen memories and a crew being driven mad by their own nightmares. An idea, desperate and insane, formed. The entity was a psychic pattern. It responded to emotion. It was currently tuned to the frequency of fear. To change the channel, you needed a stronger signal. He lunged for the ship's internal vox system, overriding the local channel. He didn't shout orders, he began to speak. His voice, thin and strained at first, cut through the psychic static. Listen to me, it is in your minds, it is showing you what you fear most. That is its food. Look at it. He pointed a shaking hand at the main viewport, at the beautiful, horrific swirl. That is not a daemon from your prayers. That is a thing that eats loneliness. It is showing you your loneliness to make you lonelier. Do you see? The crew, writhing in their individual hells, didn't respond. But Rostova lifted her head, her eyes finding his, blazing through her pain. Remigus switched tactics. He couldn't give them a collective resolve, but he could give them a collective distraction. A different story. He closed his eyes and reached into the archive, not for the pain of Sethries, but for the moments around it. The mundane, human moments the iterator's machines had considered irrelevant data noise. He began to broadcast, pouring his will into the vox, layering his words with the raw sensory memory. The taste of recaf on Sethries was bitter like burnt grain, he intoned, his voice gaining strength. It was all they had in the bunker. Kalen hated it. He'd make a face every time, and Sona would laugh. Her laugh was loud, it echoed off the plasteel walls. He painted the picture. The grime under fingernails, the way the tactical hololith flickered and cast blue light on tired faces, the smell of ozone and sweat, the sound of someone humming an off-key tune to calm their nerves. Not the heroism, but the texture of being human together in the face of doom. The Colonel was scared too. You could see it in the way he clenched his data slate. He wasn't a monster, he was a man who didn't know what to do. And Eleanor, she was so tired. She wasn't a saint. She was just the one who was willing to say the terrible idea out loud. The psychic pressure wavered. The visions of personal fear flickered. The entity's hum changed pitch, becoming a note of confusion. It was a pattern reader, and Remigus was feeding it a pattern it didn't understand, not unified courage, but fragmented, stubborn particularity. The specific, irreplaceable details of a single, lost moment. A gunner, tears streaming down his face from the vision of his dying child, blinked. He heard Remigus's voice describing Sona's laugh, and for a split second he remembered his daughter's laugh, not her sickness. The connection to his private terror frayed. Rostova pushed herself upright. "You heard him!" she roared, her captain's voice hacking through the malaise. "It feeds on what's in your head. So put something else in there. Think of the last time this crew had a victory, the ale we drank on Faraday's Rest. Think of the feel of a wrench in your hand when a seal holds. Think of your mate's hand pulling you up from a crawl space." She was directing them not towards a grand, emotional crescendo, but towards 1,000 small, solid, real memories. The antithesis of the entity's abstract, consuming fear. Remigus fed the fire. He switched memories, pulling not from Sethries, but from his time on the Witness. The smell of engine grease in Bay 3, he voxed. The way Ensign Kova always wins at dice but pretends he's surprised. The taste of the protein stew on Tuesdays, the weight of a delivered crate to people who have nothing. He was weaponizing nostalgia, weaponizing belonging, not as a unified wall, but as a scattered, dense cloud of sensory anchors. The entity recoiled. The beautiful colors swirled chaotically. It was trying to pass this new data, to find the fear in these memories, but the fear was not the primary note. The primary note was specificity, was context. It was the opposite of the nourishing, generic terror it craved. The Geller field, no longer being actively digested, stabilized. The viewport cleared for a second, showing a glimpse of real space the edge of the nebula. "Now!" Rostova screamed at the helmsman. "Full emergency thrust! Straight ahead! Punch through!" The Witness shuddered as every engine and thruster ignited at once. It was a lumbering beast attempting a sprint. The entity, confused, contracted around them, but its cohesion was broken. It was millions of conflicting sensory impressions, of small human truths that refused to be simplified into food. They tore through the last membrane of color into the clean, cold black of the void. The entity did not follow. It churned behind them, a psychic storm of indigestion, repelled not by faith or force, but by an overdose of inconvenient individual realities. On the bridge, the crew slumped at their stations, gasping, weeping with relief. The psychic weight was gone, leaving only the hollow ache of emotional exhaustion. Rostova walked to Remigus, who was leaning against the Vox panel, drenched in sweat. She looked at him, then at the receding nebula, now just a faint, colorful smear again. You didn't reflect it, she said quietly. You confused it with details. It's a consumer of pure emotion, Remigus panted. I gave it a complex history. It couldn't digest it. A grim, approving smile touched her lips. So the truth isn't a shield or a scalpel, it's seasoning, and you just poisoned its meal. He nodded weakly. The victory was temporary, bizarre, and born of desperation. But it was a victory. They had survived, not by denying the warp's nature, but by understanding it on a human level and fighting it with humanity's chaotic, messy, irreducible reality. The Witness limped on, its crew bonded by a new and stranger memory. And Remigus knew his chronicle had just acquired its most vital entry. Not a record of the past, but a manual of sorts for the future. A manual written not in principles of war or faith, but in the stubborn, saving power of specific, shared memory. The penitent witness was a wounded beast. Its Geller field generator whined with a persistent, worrying tremor, and a psychic resonance like a bad smell lingered in its lower decks. But it was alive, and it flew. The crew moved with a new, quiet energy. They had stared into a madness that fed on fear and had repelled it with the memory of stew and dice games. It was a victory so humble it felt sacred. Remigus worked in the ship's data vault, inputting the final logs of the encounter. He did not catalogue it as a warp incident, but as a xenopsychological engagement, subtype, mimetic refractor. He detailed the methodology, the targeted use of specific, positive sensory memory to disrupt a psychic entity reliant on abstract emotional consumption. It was dry, clinical, and for anyone who understood the context, revolutionary. Captain Rostova entered the vault, her footsteps soft on the grating. She held a data slate, her expression unreadable. We're being hailed, she said, her voice flat. A vessel just translated into real space ahead of us. No transponder. Its profile matches the one that pulled you from the warp. Remigus's blood ran cold. The Veritas Lux, Thorn. He's found me. He's found us, Rostova corrected. And he's not asking. He's demanding a parley. On his ship, you are requested. The implication was that refusal would be illuminating. She handed him the slate. It showed a short, ciphered text transmission. The final line was clear. Bring the archivist. The specimen has developed intriguing new properties. He knows about the nebula, Remigus said, a hollow certainty in his gut. His instruments, his psychers, they would have felt the disturbance. He's here to collect the results of his experiment. You're not a specimen, Rostova growled. To him, I am. And now this ship and its crew are part of the experiment's environment. He looked at her, the weight of his past dragging at the present once more. I should go alone. It's me he wants. And if he decides the environment needs purifying to maintain experimental purity, she countered, her green eyes hard. No, we stand together, but we do it smart. She leaned over the console, pulling up a star chart. There's a system 3 jumps from here, dead except for one thing, a listening post of the Adeptus Astropathica, a Silentium. They monitor the warp song. They are neutral, fiercely protective of their solitude, and their authority is one even an inquisitor treads lightly around. We make for it. We claim sanctuary for repairs and psychic debriefing. It's the only place his illumination won't easily reach. It was a desperate gambit. The Silentium were recluses, their loyalty to their own mysterious order superseding all else. They might simply turn them away, or they might hand Remigus over for the sake of peace. It's a risk, he said. Everything is, she replied, but it's a risk with rules, and I'd rather play a game with rules than be dissected on a slab. She opened a channel to the bridge, set course for the Vespidar Silentium, maximum sustainable burn, and send a tight beam transmission ahead. Free trader penitent witness, Geller field compromised by warp entity, requesting sanctuary and psychic remediation under the Accord of Nicaea, sub-paragraph 7. She looked at Remigus. Let's see if your archival memory includes the right legal codes to get us in the door. The pursuit was a tense, silent ballet. The Veritas Lux, sleek and powerful, could have overtaken them easily. It did not. It shadowed them, a dark spectre just at the edge of sensor range, a constant, unspoken pressure. Thorn was allowing them to run to their sanctuary. He was curious to see what they would do. The Vespidar system was a graveyard of dead planets orbiting a cold white dwarf. The Silentium was not a space station, but a facility built into the crust of an airless moon, its presence betrayed only by a forest of colossal, needle-like antennae reaching into the void. Their request was met with a long silence, then a single, wordless data burst, an approach vector and a docking code. The witness settled into a bleak, armored hangar carved from rock. The air, when it cycled in, was frigid and smelled of ozone and static. Awaiting them was a lone figure, an astropath of high rank, judging by the intricate bronze choirmaster's talk around his neck. He was tall, skeletally thin, his eye sockets smooth and sealed, his head cocked as if listening to a distant song. Captain Rostova, his voice was a whisper that seemed to come from the walls themselves. You sight the accord. Your ship's soul rings like a cracked bell, and it carries a passenger who is loud, very loud, in the spaces between thoughts. Remigus stepped forward. I am the source of the disturbance, choirmaster. My mind contains recorded psychic traumas. We were attacked by an entity that resonated with them. The blind face turned toward him. You are a book left open in a silent library. The words are screaming. He paused, his head tilting further. And you are followed by a librarian. One who wishes to burn the book to study the ashes. Inquisitor Thorn of the Ordo Iterator, Rostova confirmed. He seeks my crewmen. The Iterator, the astropath whispered, a hint of distaste in his voice. They listen only for the echoes they wish to hear. They are deaf to the true song. He gestured with a long, fingered hand. You may berth here. The librarian will be greeted at the door. The Silentium is not a place for his kind of truth. They were given austere quarters deep within the moon rock. Hours passed. Then, the expected summons came. Thorn's ship had docked. He was in the main concourse, and he demanded, with the full authority of his rosette, the surrender of the psycho-contaminated individual Remigus and all associated logs. Remigus and Rostova were escorted to an observation gallery overlooking the concourse. Below, Thorn stood, flanked by 2 Iterator tech priests. Before him stood the choirmaster and 3 other senior astropaths. Their presence a wall of silent, psychic authority. This is not a matter for the Adeptus Astropathica, choirmaster, Thorn's voice carried up, cool and logical. This is an issue of historical veracity and mimetic contamination. The individual has been compromised by a classified warp event. I must debrief him. The song of his mind is ours to assess, the choir master whispered back. You speak of contamination. We hear a complex harmony, one that recently silenced a dissonant note in the warp. A note you, Inquisitor, likely stirred with your clumsy probing. Thorn's composure flickered. You monitored the event? We hear all things that scream in the dark, another astropath hissed. You unleashed a hunter from the deep past by picking at its scar. This man, this book, did not amplify the signal, as you feared. He changed its frequency. He used memory as a buffer, a primitive but effective dampening. That is precisely what I must understand. Thorn insisted, a scientist's passion breaking through. The mechanism. He has operationalized a theoretical principle. Imagine if every Imperial ship, every garrison, could be trained to do this, to fight the warp, not with faith alone, but with applied psychohistory. You would turn a whisper of salvation into a shouted command, the choir master said, sorrow in his voice. You would kill the subtlety that gives it power. The thing he did only worked because it was specific and true. Systematize it, and it becomes a hollow ritual, a lie, and the warp knows the taste of lies. It was the heart of the conflict, laid bare in a dead moon. Thorn saw a tool to be replicated. The astropaths saw a fragile, personal truth that would die if mass-produced. He is my subject, Thorn said, his hand moving to his sidearm. My research is vital to the Imperium's survival. Your research is a noise that drowns out the song, the choir master replied. The air grew thick. The astropaths did not move, but a psychic pressure descended, a warning of immense, focused power. This was their sanctum. Here, their word was law, backed by the potential to blast a mind into smoking husk with a thought. Thorn froze, his tactical mind assessing. He was outgunned, psychically and politically, in this specific arena. He looked up, Then, directly at the observation gallery, his grey eyes finding Remigus's. He spoke, not shouting, but his voice carried with strange clarity. "You cannot hide forever, Archivist. The truth is not a pet to be kept in a quiet corner. It is a tide. It will find its way out, and when it does, I will be there, ready to channel it, to give it purpose." He turned back to the choir master, giving a shallow, stiff bow. "I withdraw. For now, the Silentium's neutrality is noted." He turned and strode back to his ship, his tech priest scurrying after him. The confrontation was over, without a shot fired. Later, in the cold quiet of their quarters, Rostova looked at Remigus. "He's right, you know. He won't stop." "I know," Remigus said, watching the Veritas Lux on a monitor as it detached and slid into the void. "But he's also wrong. The tide he wants to channel, it's made of a million little streams. Like this ship, like the colonies we visit. You can't channel that. You can only swim in it, or drown." He turned from the screen. The war for his past, for the truth of Sethrace, was now a cold war, and he was no longer a fugitive. He was a citizen of a fragile, scattered republic of quiet truths, sailing on a ship called Witness. He had a captain, a crew, and a chronicle to write. The past was armed, the future was uncertain, but the present, for now, was his.